Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Conservative Woman's Guide. I'm your host, Karin Lips. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ann Bradley for an episode on economic freedom and its impact on women and families. Dr. Bradley is a George and Sally Mayer Fellow for Economic Education and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Fund for American Studies. She is here today to speak with me about her work in political economics, how economic freedom leads to positive outcomes for people around the world, and why young people can't stop romanticizing socialism. Before we get into the interview, make sure you're subscribed to the Conservative Woman's Guide wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, leave us a 5-star review. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Karin, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
We're excited to have you. As an economist, you've spent your career researching a wide range of policy issues, from income inequality to the political economics of terrorism. I'd like to focus today's conversation on your research around economic freedom. For all the non-economists out there listening, can you define it for us? And what does economic freedom mean broadly speaking?
I love this kickoff question because I think it's one of those topics that sounds like dry and boring, and it's a big project that includes evaluating a lot of data. So sometimes that scares people off, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. We should embrace it. It's so important. So let me just start with kind of a pragmatic definition that doesn't use all the data jargon. Economic freedom, a society that has economic freedom, is one where people have lots of opportunities to buy, to sell, to open a business, to close a business should they decide, to hire whom they think is the most qualified, and to also be able, of course, to fire people who are not productive workers. And so it's the economic freedom. It's really the freedom to engage in commerce of a variety of kinds. And this really gets spearheaded about 50 years ago. Milton Friedman, everybody should know his name, I hope, Nobel laureate who was at the University of Chicago, spent his career both in academia and really as an amazing public spokesman, talking and advancing prosperity. And he believed that the way to prosperity, which is rising standard of living and rising incomes, is advanced by economic freedom. And that's really kind of the way you get that is in a capitalist type of economy, right? Where we have free markets. It's not to say you have no government or no regulations, but that those regulations are minimal and only absolutely necessary to help. So a society, the way we measure this, that's characterized by economic freedom is going to have lots of free trade internally, domestically between states, but also a lot of free trade externally with the world, low levels of regulation, a really strong protection of private property rights, contracts, the rule of law, all those types of things. Kind of a minimal government, right? We want a government that does only what's necessary to protect people's freedoms. And those are and sound currency. So those are the types of things that we measure, and we give countries a score. And of course, as with everything else, scores can go up, scores can go down based on the policies that we choose.
And where is your country scorecard if people want to look at that?
So they can look at Economic Freedom of the World, which is produced by the Fraser Institute. And if you just Google Economic Freedom of the World Report, which is a mouthful, EFW, you can find all the data, and the new report comes out every October. And it is important to keep in mind that the data is lagged, right? Economists have to deal with the data that they have, and we have to be able to compare it across countries. And so when we're looking at the data for right now, we're going to be 2 years behind, and that's true all the time. But it's very fascinating because you can really tell how policies affect institutions and individual behaviors in a country. And that, of course, percolates to the top in terms of how is that country doing overall? Is that country growing? Is that country declining? And so I think this is a very important tool for us because it kind of helps us to get away from just the political fights that we have, right? It's very, and I think we should be engaged in those and very careful and thoughtful about what's going on in the political arena. But if for this audience, right, you can imagine, and you've probably participated in a heated exchange with a friend who disagreed with you politically, and you stayed up till 2 a.m. and you kind of like duked it out, right? Of course, in a nice way. And often that doesn't change people's minds. And it's not because we don't have the right intentions, or it's not even that we're always being bad communicators. It's just that we need a way empirically to show people that our theory about the world is right. And our theory is that freedom is important for people because it allows us the best opportunity to advance human flourishing. And part of human flourishing is material. That's not the only thing that matters, right? But we want to live in a society where families can grow, where incomes are growing, where people have lots of opportunities. And so those societies have a certain set of institutions that accompany them. I think understanding this data, even generally or broadly, really gets us a long way into thinking about policy efficacy and what we should stand for, what we should stand against, perhaps.
And what are some examples from around the world where you've seen an increase in economic freedom and that's had a positive impact on women?
So I think economic freedom in general, we see a lot of data, and I will just say across the board. When societies advance in economic freedom, and again, that's based on our empirical measurements of those things that I mentioned, like the size of government, the rule of law, all those things, what we tend to see is that women and men and families do better on almost every margin. So things that we look at correlations between things like literacy rates, ability to be educated, even just at the primary level, which is something we take very for granted in the United States because most people have access to K through 12 education. In many countries in the world, we don't see that, right? We actually see maybe declines or stagnation. So things like women being able to get educated, but also things like women being able to open and own their own businesses. This is a huge issue across the developing world. Again, something that we tend to take for granted because if you want to open a business, you're 22 years old, let's say you just graduated from college, or maybe you didn't go to college at all. You have lots of opportunities in a rich country like the United States to say, I'm going to start my own graphic design business, and I'm going to do it out of my home. And the market is the test, right? You have to satisfy the demands of consumers to be successful. In many countries across the world, the market is not the test. The test is, you have to jump through all these loopholes. You have to bribe people. There's a lot of cronyism. There's a lot of political corruption, or just women don't have the same rights. They're in danger for their lives if they were to go out in public. This is a reality in the world. And so there's so many things that are positively correlated with economic freedom, both globally, and as we've seen really over the past 50 years, the world has gotten extraordinarily rich. So there's just many countries we can point to and say 50 years ago, right? Standards of living were low, life expectancy was low. Other things we look at are things like childhood mortality rates, female mortality rates in terms of having children and dying in the process, getting vaccinations and access to healthcare. All this stuff matters for the long run. So it's just, the evidence is just absolutely crystal clear that when you get even marginal increases in economic freedom, you tend to get these very big responses, and people then have a lot more opportunities to care for their families. Now, it's easy to maybe see that in the developing world, but I think it's true here as well. We're talking a lot, and maybe you wanted to get to this later, so I don't want to talk too much, but the kind of in vogue thing to talk about right now is the affordability crisis. And I think the left has a position on that, the right has a position on that, but at the end of the day, we should care about affordability. We want people in the United States to be able to go to the grocery store each week and buy healthy foods that they choose for their families. We want moms who are working to have access to daycare that they can afford. If you're a working mom at the bottom of the income distribution, we don't want you to have to choose between fixing a flat tire, right, and like being able to pay for your healthcare premium that month. We really want to think about increasing abundance across the board. And so economic freedom, even in the United States, where we think of ourselves as so rich and we have a history of doing very well, those things are at risk if we don't protect the institutions and get the right policies.
You talk about economic freedom helping women all over the world. One of the things I've talked about in New is opportunity feminism, making the case for a version of feminism that focuses on maximizing freedom so that women can then build the fulfilling and meaningful lives that they want. It seems to me that modern feminism has lagged on economic freedom and has not embraced it. What's your take on that?
I agree. I think that there's a small cohort, especially in academic circles. I mean, I graduated from George Mason University, and for my economics work, and there's really a very interesting group of actually female economists that are working on this. So there are a small minority of people who are saying, look, feminism means freedom. And it means the ability and it means economic freedom. It doesn't mean, kind of neo-Marxism or socialism. That's not the way to empower women, but that's quite the opposite, right? When women live in free market societies with limited governments, the rule of law, religious freedom, etc., and robust civil societies, those women do very well. And I agree exactly with what you said. And I think the left gets this wrong, and sometimes the right gets this wrong, which is we want people to be able to choose what they want in their lives for their families. Some women may never want to work once they have a child. Some women might want to take a few years off. Some women might want to keep working there's just such a variety of choices, and we want all those choices to be available to women, not just at the top of the income distribution where, you can hire a lot of nannies, you can go to the best private schools. That's great, but we just want that abundance to be available increasingly to people across the income distribution. I think where we go wrong in policy circles is just to kind of presume the policymakers know what women want and then enact policies that kind of speak for them. And in doing that, they totally cut off their voices. And I can just, I'm sure you have your own examples of this, but in my own life, getting a PhD in economics in the early 2000s, which is a male-dominated field, getting married in the middle of graduate school, and then deciding, kind of navigating my career throughout that, that I was empowered to do that because I live in a country with lots of economic freedom. I wouldn't be able to do that if I was living in Vietnam today, right? And so the answer is more freedom, not less. I think what that goes along with that is that people are sometimes going to make choices that we might disagree with, right? We might want more women to stay at home, but I don't think you want to live in a world where you give the government the authority to choose that for women, because you're going to have unhappy and unstable families as a result. And that's not what we want.
We've been hearing a lot in the news lately about women who are part of Gen Z are identifying increasingly as liberals. The recent mayoral election in New York City being a good example of this. Actress Amanda Seyfried recently called socialism a, quote, gorgeous idea in a podcast interview, explaining that she sees it as, quote, collective care and shared responsibility. Why do you think this generation of young women in particular is drawn to the ideas of socialism?
I think this is such a pressing and important question that we need to get a handle on. Here's the first thing I will say. I think in the world of social media, which of course is great, it's empowering what we're doing right now, right? So it's wonderful. I think the problem is that we have kind of this reduced attention span. And so if you're getting all of your philosophy, not just your talking points, but just your kind of your political philosophy from X or Instagram, it's not very thoughtful. And I would say that for anybody who did, whether you're right or left, that it's just, this is not the way we kind of think deeply about our philosophy on life and society. And so I think in an age where that's encouraged, it's not even that surprising. Here's why. It's kind of what I said before. In a capitalist world, you can open a business. I think I made the graphic designing as the example. But that doesn't mean you're going to be successful. It doesn't mean you're going to make an income. You don't know where your business is going to be in 10 years. It doesn't mean that you will be able to even kind of pay your bills in the short term. So there's risk. And there's reward. And so in a market-based society, there's a lot of pressure on the entrepreneur to do a lot of thoughtful analysis on the risk and reward. Just because you have an idea you like doesn't mean that the customer wants or likes that. And so there's just really this discipline that the market puts upon us to figure it out, and when we fail, to try again. And of course, the greatest stories of entrepreneurs are people who failed many, many, many times. Ray Kroc, McDonald's, Disney, right? We have so many examples. I mean, Jeff Bezos started his idea in his parents' garage, right? It didn't start out as a billionaire. He started out as kind of an ordinary income distribution person. So I think that's hard. It's easier to believe that the world owes us all something and that rich people can foot the bill. It's also extremely easy to villainize wealthy people. We see it in our movies. We see it in our TV shows. And what's disturbing to me, and I think this is influencing, children. I have 2 children myself, and it's like what you see in cartoons is like the corporate guy is the bad guy. They're always trying to rip people off. So the narrative is that the rich people live in their zero-sum game, which is that they get rich at the expense of us. If you listen to AOC, if you listen to Bernie Sanders, if you listen to Elizabeth Warren, those are the talking points, and they sound good, right? It's easier for me to believe rich people owe me something, and it's zero-sum, and my failings or lack of opportunity or the fact that my income is lower than I want it to be is somebody else's fault. That's easy to believe. And so when you have Mamdani saying, look, and I really encourage everyone to read his inaugural speech. I'm writing an essay on it right now, and it's just remarkable. He talks about the frigidity of rugged individualism and the warmth of collectivism. So that sounds great on paper. I don't really have to do that much. We're going to tax wealthy people. They can afford it. There's going to be no unintended consequences. I'll get some more money. Boom. Life in New York will be better. New York is already one of the most expensive cities in the world. And I think just a few days ago, they passed kind of universal early childhood daycare kind of thing. So that is not free. Someone has to pay for it. This is where the laws of economics are very important for us to understand. And so, fine, you're going to make it, quote, free. It's not free at zero price for some people, but that's heavily subsidized by other people. And if those other people decide they don't want to live in a world where they have to pay for everything, they're going to leave. And so New York will destroy itself internally if it keeps up with this type of idea. So I think, long-winded answer to your question, I think these ideas are catchy, they sound good on paper, and they sell very well in the little snippets of social media that we get. Think about the average length of your Instagram reel. Sounds good. But me talking about, kind of personal responsibility, and you might fail 5 times before you succeed, all that stuff, I think that's harder to sell. I think the benefits are there and we live them, but I think it's harder to sell.
How then do you respond to those who argue that some economic freedom is good, but it can be taken too far?
And I think we're seeing a lot of this. The evidence does not bear that out. Again, I think the problem too, especially as conservatives, what conservatives have to think about is that there are people that are going to make choices we dislike and that we don't agree with. And what is the role of the government? The role of the government is not to kind of enter your house and tell you how many children to have. The role of the government, or not have, the role of the government is not to tell you what to put on your plate. But the role of the government is to protect your rights that are inalienable. And this is America 250. So it's a really important time to go back to the Declaration and think about those founding principles. The economic freedom is baked into those principles. The founders understood the need for a commercial society, that this would, again, allow people to freely live. Now, obviously, we don't have unlimited rights, right? We have to protect everybody's rights. I think that's the proper role of government. But I disagree with, economic freedom is okay to an extent, but here it goes too far. Here's why I disagree with it. Because when you say that, what is implied is that now there's a role for the government to curtail economic freedom. Do you want to, it's a slippery slope from there. So what are we going to curtail? What limits are we going to put on? Are we going to cap incomes? Are we going to cap spending? What are we going to force people to do? So realize anytime we ask the government, invite the government into the conversation, the government has the monopoly of force. And our founders, of course, were worried about that force being used in disastrous ways. And we need to keep that in mind. So it's a very tenuous balance, I think. And this is why I think a robust civil society is necessary for capitalism. It's not just about, the market can't solve all of our problems. The market can't fulfill all your spiritual needs. We need a robust civil sector, which is where the family is, your neighborhood yard sales and block parties, Girl Scouts, right? All of that stuff is so important. And I would encourage people to do another reading, which is Tocqueville. Just go back to Tocqueville a little bit, because that's what he saw was so profoundly unique and important in the American experience, which is we had these independent institutions where people helped each other. They were neighborly. They solved each other's problems in maybe ways at the time the market could not. And that was a buttress, a defense against a growing government. So I think we can't talk about capitalism versus socialism without also talking about the import of a robust civil society. And that's kind of on all of us to do that and to protect that space from the government.
And you mentioned that we don't want the government telling us all how many children to have. There's been a lot of discussion recently about declining fertility and about what government could do to subsidize or support families in the United States. What policies do you think would be good for families?
This is a great question. And again, I think the policies are often very well intentioned. People are recognizing the decline in fertility. It's not just in the United States. It's kind of a ubiquitous issue across the globe where we see very, very wealthy countries. They start to see a decline in fertility. I think this is not just a spiritual problem. In the long run, it's an economic problem, especially if we continue at our current spending patterns. So if we're not willing to rein in spending, you really need a lot of people so you can tax them, which is kind of a very utilitarian and unhelpful way to think about children, right? And this is not why people have children, to support the tax base, right? So I think, but you asked about policies though. I think we kind of have to turn it on its head. There's a lot of people who are saying, what can we give families to encourage them to have more children? Like stipends, things like this.
The
baby bonus. This tends to not work. What it usually amounts to is that if, let's say you have 2 children and you were thinking about having 3 and there's a baby bonus of, $5,000 or whatever it might, 10,000, 20,000, you might say, okay, I'll have that third. But what we tend to see is people who were already planning on having another one just have that child earlier, rather than inducing a person who had no intention to have children to go from 0 to 1 or 0 to 2 or 0 to 3. So it's not really solving the problem. I think what's interesting is figuring out who are the people that are interested in larger families, right? And it tends to be religious people. I really encourage people to read Catherine Pollack's book, Hannah's Children, which is kind of an investigation. She does interviews with highly educated women who have at least 5 children. Fascinating book.
And can I interrupt and say I'm excited to share with our listeners that she's going to be joining the podcast this season.
She's really wonderful, and I think she's asking the right questions. Not like what are the policies we should use, but why? Who are the people that want to have large families? What motivates them? And as a social scientist, that's the right question, not just like, let's throw money at people. And let me just ask a question people should think about. Do you want to live in a world where the government pays you to have children? This is not going to form stable, long-lasting, healthy, happy families. So what we could do is say, let's make it less expensive to have a family. And I think that's where we have missed the mark in the conversation. Now, yes, people are talking about the affordability crisis, but here's a couple things I think about. Daycare. Daycare is very expensive. I live in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has the most expensive daycare in the country. Why, you might ask? They have the highest regulations, making it very difficult. You think about daycares before you're 5, right? So we're talking about, in many cases, people running a business out of their home. Oftentimes they're moms who just had a baby and they can't not work. So instead of paying for daycare themselves, they say, I'm going to open a daycare in my apartment. This is great. It supports the family in both ways. She gets to be with her baby and she gets to raise a little money, right? Or make a little money. So I think we've regulated that out of existence in certain states. So let's reduce the barriers to entrepreneurship. Right, daycare is one. Another issue that's very pressing and people are worried about it is college. If you look at college costs over time, just in the past 25 years, they're orders of magnitude more expensive than they were. This is a problem. It's putting college out of reach, again, for lower income families. Another issue we could think about is reinvigorating interest in trade schools. I don't think that's a government policy. You asked about policy. So I would say, I'm not sure that's the government's role. But, it's interesting because there's elevator lift operator jobs that go unfilled. And I think the average income is something like $150,000 for that job, where you go to a vocational school and then you go do that trade. So there's opportunities waiting. They're unfilled opportunities. So I think that's the way we help people, is kind of monetary policy matters, right? Because inflation matters, because inflation affects the general price level. So we need to think about our policies. But again, I think reducing obstacles to entrepreneurship so that, because entrepreneurs are standing right on the sidelines waiting to come in and solve these problems, cheaper daycare, better college opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's how you solve it. That's not as sexy as paying people $20,000 to have a baby, right? So I think that those don't get as much political clout, perhaps, as they should, but I think they're real answers to the real problems we face.
As you've mentioned, you are married with children. Could you share a little bit about how you've been able to integrate your faith and work and family responsibilities?
Absolutely. It's not easy. So I will say that to all of our young women in particular who are listening, because I think, again, maybe this is just a product of media, social media in general, but we paint it as like you can have it all, and you certainly cannot have it all because we live in a world of scarcity, and that applies to women. So I think setting yourself up for like, I can do it all and I can do it all beautifully and perfectly is not really a good picture of being a wife or being a mother or being a professional. I think you have to think about what you want, and you have to be very flexible. It is okay to take time off. It is okay to leave the workforce. It is okay to stay in the workforce. So again, you want to pick a husband, if you're not married yet, and who agrees with you, who you've thought about this and talk about it. You have to support each other. There's a really interesting division of labor in my house. So for example, my husband, he works in IT, and he kind of is just on calls all day if he's not traveling. And so he does things like laundry, because it's easy to do that between a call. Whereas I'm on campus teaching, I'm traveling. And so if I were to do laundry, it would never be done on the same day. So to have some stability in the laundry logistics, he does it. We share dinner. I take the kids places. I drive them to practice. You have to figure that out. And you might need to hire help, right? Sometimes we live near both sets of grandparents. I know not everybody can do that.
That's amazing.
Amazing. I mean, my mom is 80 years old, and she will pick up my daughter from school if I need her. She's in great shape. So we're blessed. Not everybody can have that. But I think you do have to create, this village around you of people, moms, neighbors, and help each other, because you need it. It's okay to ask for help. It's important to ask for help. So I would say, don't think it's like this Instagram reel, right? Where we're just showing everybody the highlights and that's everyday life. That's not it. But I think you have to be flexible. And I work with amazing employers. I work at the Fund for American Studies. And they've just been wonderful to work for. So I think you need to be careful when you choose where you want to work. I also teach at the Institute of World Politics, and they're wonderful to work for. So it's okay to pick a profession based on not just your comparative advantage. That's, of course, the most important thing, but also the lifestyle that it affords you, because not everybody can be on, the partner track at a top law firm in Washington, D.C. and have the kids they want to have. And that's okay. I mean, the world is full of scarcity, and we have to reconcile and negotiate those trade-offs all the time. So I would just say having a realistic understanding of what you can do and being patient and flexible. I also think one more thing I want to say, I tell my students this all the time. When you're young, you tend to think it's like, okay, I'm going to graduate with this degree, and then there's going to be this like straight line my whole career, and I'm going to retire, and then I'm going to play tennis or be with my grandkids, whatever, right? And the line isn't straight, and the line, you can't look from A to Z. You don't know what's ahead. So just a quick example, when I was in graduate school, 9/11 happened. That allowed me to write about Al-Qaeda with a professor. That then induced me to kind of write my dissertation on the topic. I was fascinated. That professor said, you should go work for the CIA. And I was like, why would I do that? I want to be an academic. I want to be with students. And he said, because you have developed a theory, take it to the real world. I was like, okay. And it's interesting, I didn't stay there long because I really did want to be in the classroom. But that has been an invaluable experience for me. But if somebody had told me I was going to do that, I would have been like, you're crazy. That's why would I do, right? So the road is winding, and it's not foreseeable. We have to know that and really embrace it, and then be very thoughtful about opportunities we say yes to and opportunities you decline. Thoughtful in both of those directions.
The trade-offs, I feel like there's got to be a lot more discussion about the trade-offs and the hard choices and the scarcity of time, quite frankly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the biggest things that's changed in my life is my son is about to drive. I'm like, oh my gosh, hallelujah.
That's a game changer.
Talk about scarcity of time. Yeah.
You mentioned your work with the Fund for American Studies. I know there's a lot of students who go through their programs. Can you share a little bit about your work there?
I would love to. So I work a lot on our economic education. We have several programs, both domestically and internationally. Our biggest programs, which some of the current college students or even if you've just recently graduated in May might be interested in, is we have a DC summer program where you come to DC for 8 weeks. You take classes at George Mason taught by me and other faculty members, and those go towards their degree fulfilling. So we try to pick classes that can easily transfer back. And then you get really amazing internships opportunities and you live in the city. We have a spring program as well that's much smaller. I think we're about to welcome 22 students. In the summer, we take almost 300. We have several international programs. We have our program in Chile that's just wrapping up, and then we have one in Prague in the summer. So there's wonderful opportunities. If you're a law student, we have a law fellows program in the summer. There's just amazing opportunities for students. Again, if you're interested in some of these ideas we've talked about. And I would say it's kind of like, for the summer program, think of study abroad, but study in DC. So you get to be in the heart of the city where politics, international and foreign affairs kind of occur. And so for people that are interested in those types of things, it's really wonderful. Now, if you're also interested in a graduate degree, you're kind of curiosity is picked by the CIA story I told and my research on terrorism or those types of things, the Institute of World Politics is also a wonderful place to think about pursuing a master's degree. So lots of great opportunities. IWP also has an internship program. So I just think there's so many great opportunities, but I'm just thrilled to be able to work for both these organizations who do and care so well for students.
Finally, as 2026 kicks off, what are some key economic policies that you are watching?
Okay, so without being able to probably go into all of them, again, like I said, it will be interesting to see where this kind of vague term affordability goes and what we're going to be focused on and thinking about. So, of course, interested in, what happens with inflation, watching the markets, that will be very important. Watching what happens with tariffs. I think that tariffs are a very important discussion point right now. And I think, again, it's one of those issues where there's a lot of misunderstanding. So we need really sound economic thinking on when tariffs, why tariffs, how long tariffs, what are the unintended consequences, those types of things. So I'll be very closely watching what is happening there. So I think those are two just really big kind of policies. I think at the more local level, again, I'm really interested to see every year we have economic freedom of the world, but we also have economic freedom of the 50 states. And so you can look at, kind of what state policies are changing, why they're changing, how they're changing. So I'm generally very interested in kind of regulatory types of policies and how they shift, because again, I think they're at a much more local level and they impact local entrepreneurship. So those are kind of some things that I'm thinking about and watching economically, at least as we head into this year.
Well, thank you, Anne, so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It was great to interview Anne and discuss her views on economic freedom. Subscribe to the Conservative Woman's Guide wherever you get your podcasts so that new episodes automatically download. Leave a 5-star review and share this episode with your friends. We'll see you next time.